Welcome to the Colorlines Critical Issues series. I'm Michael Ilme, and today we'll be talking with two authors of recent books on the very contentious issue of immigration. We're pleased to really feature David Bacon, the author of Illegal People, and Rinku Sen, the author of The Accidental American. I want to ask you about that first, Rinku. What did you mean by The Accidental American?
We came up with that title because it really reveals the way that most people immigrate to the United States. Very, very few people think, I'm going to go to the U.S. and I'm going to stay forever and I'm going to become an American. Most people actually think, I'll go for a while, I'll make money, I'll send it home, and eventually I'll go back. That was certainly true about my parents. For many years, their intention was to live here for a time, do well, and go back to India.
You alluded to this bit at the beginning. How is this reflective of your own experiences?
I think my family's experience and my experience growing up as an immigrant kid in largely white communities, always looking for a way to be part of the community that I was in, and always feeling isolated until really I discovered organizing and politics, and used the organizing and politics to become fully American. That story, that trajectory seems to have really played out also in the story of Fekak Mamdouh, my co-author and the subject of the book, and in the stories of many of the immigrants who are in the book.
David, are there particular kinds of, as you looked at these undocumented immigrants in various sectors, is there a particular kind of story or that really seemed to inspire you in some ways?
Well, I think the story that inspired me the most was the story of Pablo Alvarado, who grew up in a small town in El Salvador during the Civil War and learned how to organize politically through the kind of popular education techniques that were very popular among the in the liberated areas of El Salvador. So he learned how to conduct literacy campaigns, for instance, in villages where there were no teachers or where the military had killed the teachers or the people who would ordinarily be teaching children to read. In fact, Pablo said that learning to read in El Salvador was as much a crime as learning to read was for slaves in the Deep South in the United States. And so Pablo brought those techniques of organizing to Los Angeles, where he and other people like him began using them to organize day laborers on the street corners of Los Angeles. And day laborers have the most precarious employment situation of anybody living in this country because they have to get hired every day as though they'd never had a job before. They get cheated, all kinds of terrible things happen to them. And Pablo and the people from the Institute for Popular Education in Southern California learned how to use literacy campaigns, the organizing of soccer leagues where one corner would play another, organizing theater groups in which workers would themselves become the actors, dramatizing their own personal experiences as immigrants and workers, all of these things to organize people who for many, many years have been looked at by unions and popular movements in this country as being unorganizable people. So I thought that was a very inspiring story for me.
Certainly a lot has changed in the overall political climate since 9/11. How has 9/11 affected particularly undocumented immigrants in the United States?
Well, my book explores really what happened to the people who were most affected by the anti-immigrant and climate of fear that got created after September 11th. The story of Fekak Mamdouh is, I think, a really typical 9/11 story for Muslim immigrants in particular. So Mamdouh worked at Windows on the World. He was a waiter there. That's the restaurant that was at the top of the North Tower at the World Trade Center. And he was devastated to lose 73 of his colleagues and friends and coworkers on September 11th, and then further devastated to find that when he went out into the world, or in Queens and in New York, where he had lived for 12 years, felt perfectly well accepted for all of that time, he was shocked to find that suddenly people who never looked at him twice before September 10th suddenly looked at him with accusing glares and actually blamed him for the deaths of his own coworkers. And I think that had a really intense emotional effect on him, and made him both question his place in the United States, but also become much more determined to make his place in the United States, to defend his place in the United States.
David, how specifically have some of the people that you've looked at been affected by what's happened in a sort of post 9/11 climate?
Well, first of all, people can't go home. 9/11 basically shut down the border, so that it became much more difficult for people to cross it. Up until 9/11, it was pretty common, for instance, for farm workers to go home around Christmas time and to spend a month back at home, whether home was a town in Oaxaca or El Salvador or whatever, and then come back and go back to work again. And even though it still cost money to cross the border, it wasn't nearly as much. Before 9/11, it probably cost about $500 to hire a guide to help you walk through the desert. After 9/11, the price shot up. Now it's $2,000 or $3,000 to go through the desert. But it's also much more dangerous. More people die trying to come, and also it's just simply much more difficult. So people stay in the United States for much longer periods of time, even though this comes at sometimes a very high cost. I talked to many farm workers who really miss their families, can't see them, can't go home. Their parents get sick, can't afford to come back and provide some care for their families, can't afford to be with their kids. It's really imposed a whole new level of separation and the kind of family and personal pain that goes along with that kind of separation for people.
David sort of earlier alluded to the prospects around coalitional politics between different groups of color, perhaps different, social economic levels within a workplace. Was this illustrated in your work as well?
Yeah, there are numerous stories in the book about restaurant workers building multiracial alliances, and the multiracialness of the Restaurant Opportunity Center of New York is what attracted me to that organization and to their story in the first place. So they started out as including African immigrants, Moroccan immigrants, Indians, Bangladeshis, Mexicans, Colombians, Venezuelans, and they really, from the beginning, were a reflection of the industry and who is in the industry all the way along. And then they have aggressively reached out to white and black U.S. resident and citizen workers who work in other parts of the industry, and reached out to largely white and often middle class or fairly wealthy restaurant owners. So I think that their coalition building and their alliance building has shown that if you have a good idea, an idea that speaks to people's core experience, everyone in this country relates to restaurants in one way or another, then you can use that common experience to reach out to people who otherwise you might think you had nothing in common with.
Thank you both for your thoughts, reflections, and really contributions to a very important debate. We have Rinku Sen, author of The Accidental American, and David Bacon, author of Illegal People. Thank you.